It's taken a couple of years, but some of Tony Abbott's nuttier policies are finally coming under criticism from within his own party. There's already been a ruckus about his parental leave scheme, of course, which is considered to be too expensive and too generous altogether. And now there's a revolt developing against his direct action to combat climate change policy. Now, it's developing for all the wrong reasons. The revolt is in fact being led by those who like to describe themselves as climate change skeptics, which mean they simply don't believe the science, they prefer to believe superstition. But at least the revolt is there, and people are going to have another rather closer look at this absurd policy that Tony Abbott developed. It was the brainchild of his Environment Minister Greg Hunt, who is actually a believer and wanted it to stick with an emissions trading scheme. But that, of course, was politically a no-no for Tony Abbott and his supporters, so Hunt was given the unenviable task of developing an alternative scheme. Although Abbott himself had described the science of climate change as crap, he was unwilling to risk the political odium of dumping his scheme altogether. So he came up with this alternative, which is called direct action, which means essentially that instead of the polluters paying the price of the damage, the taxpayer does instead. The taxpayer has to fork out for various ways of reducing carbon emissions, one of which has become known among the scientific community as Tony Abbott's soil magic. This is a device where you semi-burn carbon and bury it in the earth in the hope that it'll go away. And of course it will, but it's a very, very ineffective and inefficient and expensive way of dealing with the subject. And according to the Department of the Treasury, the Department of Environmental Science, all the other boffins in the government side, it just won't work. And if it does work, it's going to cost, well, an absolute poultice. Tony Abbott has allocated $3.2 billion for it over a 4-year period. The Treasury estimate is that it'll cost at least 3 times that to produce the 5% emissions in greenhouse gas, 5% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, which will match the government's commitment. And obviously Tony Abbott is not going to sign up for $10 billion, not at this stage of his life. So the chances are that the scheme will be dumped altogether, which won't be a bad thing in a way. It will leave Julia Gillard's carbon tax, and which is to develop into an emissions trading scheme, as the only game in town. And the business community is not going to be too unhappy if they're given at least that much certainty before the next election. That'll stop them. It might stop them railing against Tony Abbott's industrial relations light policy, which again is going to be the subject of considerable criticism both inside and outside the Liberal Party. The party is over. I'm Mungo McCallum.